I have already set aside what you think you finished an hour ago. Before you say the celebration is over, hear this while you still can. I am the one still filling jars. Even now, even after the guests began whispering that the wine had run out. You have been counting what is left in the glass in your hand and calling it the whole cellar. I have not served you the best of what I carry only to disappear the moment it looked used up. I am not finished pouring. I know the particular shame of watching something good run dry sooner than you expected it to. Not a tragedy, not a headline, a smaller, quieter humiliation. The kind you would never say out loud at the table where it happened. A marriage that used to feel like a feast now tastes like water you are pretending not to notice. A friendship that once ran deep enough to lose track of time now gets rationed into a yearly text. A faith that used to fill the room now sits thin in the bottom of the cup. And you drink it anyway, because you are too proud to let anyone see. The pitcher is nearly empty. You keep glancing toward the door, wondering how much longer you can keep the guests from noticing, wondering whether the good part of your life has already happened. And this is simply what remains of it. You have a box somewhere, a shelf, a phone folder, a drawer you do not open on ordinary days, where the record of the better vintage still sits untouched. A toast someone gave that made the whole room go quiet. A photograph from a year when everything still tasted like the first course of something wonderful. You do not take it out often, because taking it out means measuring it against what is on the table now, and the measuring never goes the way you want it to. You have started speaking of that season the way people speak of a harvest that already happened. Past tense, finished. Something to be grateful for rather than something you are still standing inside of. I have watched you do the arithmetic more than once, quietly, late, subtracting the good years already spent from however many you think remain and arriving at a number that frightens you. I did not hand you that arithmetic. I am not bound by it, and neither, in the end, are you. There is a wedding I want to take you to. Small, forgettable by any account, except the one that mattered. A village too modest for anyone to write down its name if not for what happened there. And partway through the celebration, before the dancing had worn itself out, before half the guests had even settled into their seats, the wine ran out. Not a metaphor to you yet. An actual, mortifying, practical shortage. The kind that could follow a family for years in a town where everyone remembered everything. The host had planned for joy and miscalculated the appetite for it. That failure, small as it looks from here, is closer to your own story than you have let yourself admit. You planned carefully too. You still ran out sooner than you thought you would. Here's the first thing I want to put in your hands. Turn it over slowly before you set it down. The world serves its best wine first. Every host who has ever thrown a party you have attended follows the same quiet rule. Pour the good vintage early while people can still taste the difference and bring out whatever is left, thinner and cheaper, once no one is paying close enough attention to complain. That is how most things arrive to you. The best day of the courtship comes before the wedding. The clearest sense of calling comes before the years of grinding it out. The sharpest edges of a friendship come before the long stretch where you simply keep showing up for each other without any of the spark that started it. You learned the order early, and you have been quietly grieving it ever since, certain that whatever is served last in any story must be the weaker pour. Maybe your particular shortage has a harder edge than a marriage gone quiet or a faith gone routine. Maybe you buried someone, and the celebration you feel guilty for wanting again is simply ordinary joy itself. Laughing, without the catch in your throat, sitting at a table without counting the empty chair first. You have half decided that reaching for gladness again would be a kind of disloyalty to what you lost, so you have been sipping carefully at your own life, afraid that a fuller cup would mean you had stopped grieving properly. I do not ask that of you. Grief and a refilled cup have shared a table before, more often than you would guess, and neither one erased the other. Wanting the wine to return is not betrayal. It is simply what a living heart still does. I do not run my table that way. I never have. What you are tasting right now, the thin and watery stretch you are ashamed of, is not what I intend to leave you drinking. I keep the richest pour for later in the story, not because I forgot you at the start, but because I am not the kind of host who front-loads the joy and lets the second half of the evening go flat. Somewhere in you, there is a rule, built without your noticing, that says the good part is always behind you now. I did not write that rule. You did, out of a season when it happened to be true, and then you mistook it for how I operate in every season after. There were 6 stone jars standing along the wall of that house, the kind used for washing before a meal, plain and heavy, meant for water, and nothing more interesting than water. Not decoration, not for wine. Just the ordinary vessels of a religious habit so routine that no guest at the party would have given them a second look. Notice that I did not conjure a new container for what I was about to do. I did not have someone run out and find something finer. I pointed to the jars already standing there, already familiar, already half forgotten in the corner of the room, and I said, "Fill those." That instruction is worth sitting with, because it is not the one you were hoping for. You wanted a new life handed to you, a fresh start with none of the plain, worn-in habits of your old one attached. What I gave the servants instead was permission to keep using exactly what was already in the room. Your ordinary devotion, the prayer said in the same tired words every night, the same worn pages you have read so many times you could recite half of them without looking, the same faithful, unglamorous showing up you have half convinced yourself does nothing. That is not the empty jar I am waiting to replace. That is the jar I'm about to fill. Some of you have started to believe that the plainness of your practice is the proof it stopped working. You pray, and it sounds the same as it did last year. You sit in the same seat, sing the same songs, read the same chapters you have read 100 times, and none of it feels like it is producing anything you could point to and call a wonder. So you have quietly begun looking elsewhere. A louder church, a newer method, a stranger's testimony you are trying to copy because your own life has started to feel like plain water standing in a corner. I am not asking you to abandon the jar. I'm asking you to trust that I still know what to do with something this ordinary. Notice, too, who did the filling. Not me, not directly, not with a visible hand reaching down from somewhere no one could see. The servants carried the water themselves, jar by jar, arm-tired, following an instruction that must have felt faintly ridiculous the whole time they were doing it. Guests are asking for wine, and you are handing me a bucket of water. That thought must have crossed someone's mind before the transformation had shown itself at all. Notice that obedience came before understanding. They filled the jars to the brim before they had any evidence it would matter. That is closer to what I am asking of you than any grand act of faith you have been waiting to be strong enough to attempt. You have been waiting for a feeling of certainty before you will move, before you forgive the person who has not apologized, before you show up again to the work that has not thanked you in months, before you pray the prayer you stopped believing would change anything. You have decided, quietly, that obedience without the feeling of faith attached to it does not really count. That it would be dishonest somehow to fill the jar while still doubting anyone would ever draw wine out of it. But the servants in that story were not required to believe the water would change before they carried it. They were only required to carry it, arm-tired, uncertain, following an instruction that made no sense yet. Their hands did not know what their obedience was building toward. I am not asking you to manufacture a confidence you do not have. I am asking you to keep filling the jar with the plain, doubting hands you already have, and let the transformation be mine to manage on a timetable that has never once needed your certainty to arrive first. I want to pull you briefly away from the wedding itself, because there is something in the room worth noticing before we go back. Stone, in that culture, was chosen for jars meant to hold water for ceremonial washing precisely because stone does not carry impurity the way other materials were believed to. It was the material of ritual cleanliness, heavy, plain, built to last generations, never meant to be beautiful, only meant to be trusted. I did not choose fragile clay for what was about to happen. I chose the sturdiest, most unremarkable vessel in the house. Whatever feels most ordinary and load-bearing in your own life, the habit no one compliments you for keeping, was very likely built the same way for the same reason, not for show. For carrying weight over the long haul. Clay jars, by contrast, were considered vulnerable, porous, easily made unclean by whatever touched them, discarded rather than cleaned once they had absorbed the wrong thing. Stone could be washed and used again, year after year, wedding after wedding, without ever losing what it was made for. I want you to hear what that means for the parts of you that feel used, that feel like they have already been through too much of a hard season to still be fit for anything holy. You are not the fragile kind of vessel that has to be thrown out once it has been through something difficult. You are the kind that gets washed and kept and filled again, over and over, for as long as the house stands. Nothing that has happened to you has disqualified the jar. It only meant it needed rinsing before the next pour. There is a woman in that story who noticed the shortage before anyone else did and said something plainly, without dramatics, to the one person she trusted to do something about it. And when she did not receive the answer she expected right away, she did not argue her case or explain the urgency further. She simply turned to the servants standing nearby and told them one thing: whatever he tells you to do, do it. That is the whole of her recorded instruction. Not a strategy, not a demand for a timeline. A trust that did not need to understand the plan before it was willing to cooperate with it. I want that same trust from you now, in the ordinary stretch where the shortage is obvious and the miracle is not yet visible. There is a particular ache in standing at your own table, while someone 2 seats down is still on the first course of a feast that has not thinned out for them yet. You have watched a friend's marriage still taste like the wedding week, years in. You have watched someone else's calling still burn as bright as it did the day they started, while yours has gone quiet and dutiful. It is easy from where you are sitting to believe your portion was simply smaller, that some households get the whole bottle and others get the dregs, and there was never any fairness in how the pouring got divided. I want to correct that quietly before it hardens into something you carry for good. What you are seeing at their table is not the whole of their story, any more than the thin cup in your own hand is the whole of yours. Every table runs dry eventually. You have simply arrived at your dry stretch first, or seen it more clearly, and mistaken the timing for a verdict on how much you were ever going to be given. I am not measuring out affection by the size of anyone's pour. I am not finished with your table any more than I was finished with theirs. The servants alone knew where the wine had actually come from. The master of the feast, the one whose role it was to notice quality and comment on it publicly, tasted what was in his cup and had no idea it had been water an hour earlier. He praised the host for a decision the host never made, for a vintage the host never purchased, for a generosity that was mine the whole time and got credited to someone else entirely. I do that more often than you know. I have filled jars quietly in your life and let someone else take the compliment. For the meal, the marriage, the unexpected kindness that reached you at the exact hour you needed it, because the point was never that you would trace the miracle back to me and applaud. The point was that you would be fed, and that the ones who did the actual carrying, the ones closest to the water, would know. You are one of the ones closest to the water. Whatever labor you have been doing that no one else sees, the early mornings, the patience with a person who has not yet changed, the showing up to a room that does not applaud you for it. You are the servant in this story, not the host and not the guest. You do not need the whole banquet hall to know where the wonder came from. You only need to keep carrying what I told you to carry, jar after jar, arm tired, until it is time to draw some out and see what it has become. Notice something else about the servants in that account. Not one of them is named. Whoever wrote the story down did not think their names mattered to what happened, only their obedience did, and history has been content to let them stay anonymous ever since. I want to speak directly to the ones of you living inside that same kind of anonymity right now. The parent whose work is measured in meals no one photographs. The caregiver whose whole day disappears into a room most people never enter. The one who prays for a family by name every morning and will likely never be thanked for a single one of those prayers out loud. You have wondered whether work this invisible is work that matters to me. I was standing closer to those servants than I was to the guests being served that night. I've always paid closest attention to the labor no one else is watching. Your name may never appear in the part of the story anyone else reads. It has never once been missing from mine. Touch your throat now, just 2 fingers, not your whole palm. Low, where you can feel the plain, steady beat of your own pulse without trying to find it. Do not search for anything more than that. Just notice how much your body has been quietly carrying and moving through you this entire time, without a single word of instruction from you, without you managing a moment of it. That is closer to how the filling works than you have realized. You were not asked to generate the wine. You were only asked to carry the water and let something else do the transforming. Here is what was written down by someone who was standing close enough that night to taste it himself. And I want to give it to you now, in the plain words he used. John 2:9-10. When the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine, he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." Read it slowly, because every clause corrects something you have believed about how your own story is ordered. The water had already become wine before the tasting. The change happens before anyone confirms it, and you do not have to watch a shift occurring to trust that it is real. Credit for the miracle landed somewhere else entirely. The world will often praise the visible outcome of what I have done in you, without ever tracing it back to me. And that has never once cost you the gift itself. Only the ones who carried the water understood what had actually happened. You, closest to the plain and unglamorous labor, will recognize the miracle in a way the applauding crowd never will. And then the line worth keeping above every other: you have saved the best till now. Not despite the delay, because of it. The lateness was not a failure in the plan. The lateness was the plan. Notice, too, who received the credit for it: the bridegroom, the one being married, standing in for every ordinary person about to be praised for a generosity that was never their own to begin with. That has happened for you more times than you have counted. A kindness with my fingerprints all over it, handed to someone else to receive the thanks for, while you kept carrying water in a corner no one was watching. 6 stone jars, each one holding somewhere between 20 and 30 gallons. Filled to the brim on a plain instruction that must have looked like a waste of effort at the time. That is not a modest gesture. That is well over 100 gallons of the finest wine any guest at that wedding had tasted all evening, produced from what had been sitting in the corner of the room as plain water an hour before. I did not perform a small correction to cover the shortage quietly and move on. I answered a lack with an abundance so far past what the moment required that the leftover itself became part of the testimony. When I move to fill what has run dry in you, I am not interested in giving you just enough to get through the rest of the evening without embarrassment. I'm interested in giving you more than the room can drink. That is worth turning over again, because scarcity has been training you to expect a careful, rationed answer even from me. A small top-up, just enough to cover the gap. Nothing you would ever call lavish, But abundance was the whole character of what happened in that house. I am not a host who solves a shortage by handing out smaller cups to everyone at the table. I am a host who fills what is empty until it overflows the rim, until there is more left over than there was need in the first place. Whatever you are afraid is running out in you right now, the patience, the hope, the plain willingness to keep loving someone who has not yet given you a reason to, was never going to be met with a careful trickle from me. It was always going to be met like this. Too much. On purpose. Think about what happened to the leftover wine that night. The gallons no single wedding could finish in one evening. It did not stay locked in the house where the miracle happened. It went home with the guests. It got poured for neighbors who had no idea a shortage had ever threatened the celebration at all, who only knew that the wine at that particular wedding was better than anything they had tasted in years. What I fill in you rarely stays contained to you either. The patience I pour into a tired parent ends up steadying a child who will not remember where it came from. The hope I refill in a grieving friend ends up carrying someone else through a room they were dreading to walk into alone. You have been so focused on your own thinning cup that you have not noticed how much of what I have already poured into you has quietly become someone else's portion too. The overflow was never wasted. It was always headed somewhere. I want to go back to the shame you have been carrying since the beginning of this, because I have not forgotten it and I am not finished with it yet. You have believed that the running out itself was the verdict, that a life or a love or a faith that thins out proves it was never as good as you thought it was, proves you miscalculated, proves you are the host standing red-faced in front of guests who are starting to notice. I want to release you from that verdict completely. The running out was never the end of the story I was telling through you. It was the middle of it, the exact place where I do my best work, because a full jar has no room left in it for me to fill. It had to run dry first. Every jar in that room did. Some of what has thinned out in your life will not be restored in the shape it had before, and I will not promise you a returned marriage exactly as it was, or a friendship rebuilt on the old terms, or a season of faith that feels precisely like it did when you were young in it and everything was new. What I promise is not a replica of what you lost. It is a fuller pour than the one you are grieving, arriving through the same plain vessel you already have in your hands, on a timetable I have not handed you in advance. That is harder to wait for than a guarantee with a date attached. It is also the only kind of promise that has ever actually been true. To the one of you counting years now more than you count anything else, wondering whether the back half of your life is destined to be the thinner pour after a first half that already had its best moments, hear this apart from everything else I have said. I do not organize a life the way the world organizes a party. Best portion first, remainder afterward. Some of what I am pouring for you has not even reached the table yet, and it was never contingent on how many years you have left to taste it. A life given to me does not run on the world's schedule of decline. It runs on mine, and mine has never once rushed to serve the weaker portion toward the end. Breathe out first this time, not in. A long, unhurried release, longer than the breath that follows it will be. Let it run the way a steward tips a full jar at a long table and lets the pour fall in a single unbroken stream, never quick about it just because the cup underneath looks thirsty. You are not bracing for a shortage right now. You are simply letting go of something the way a steady hand releases a full jar without spilling any of it. I want to tell you what this first sign was actually for, because it was never really about the wine. It happened at a wedding, of all places. Not a temple, not a mountain, not a moment set apart with any obvious solemnity, but a celebration, ordinary joy, dancing and eating in a room full of people who had gathered because two lives were joining together. That was where I chose to reveal what I could do for the very first time, not in a crisis, in a party that was in danger of ending too early. I care about your joy running out just as much as I care about your grief. I am not only the God you call on when the real disasters arrive. I am the one who notices when the celebration itself is thinning and moves quietly to keep it going. There will be a table in your life again. Maybe there already is one, further along than you can see from here, where someone tastes what has come out of the plain, worn jar you kept carrying through the driest stretch, and says, without knowing the whole story, that this is better than what came before. You do not have to arrange that moment. You do not have to explain the miracle to the one drinking it. You only have to keep carrying water into the jar you were told to fill, keep showing up to the labor no one applauds, and let me handle the part where water becomes what the room actually needed. There will come a day, further along than you can see from here, when someone near you runs low on their own wine, their own hope, their own nerve, their own reason to believe the good part has not passed them by, and you, having stood exactly where they are standing now, will become the one who quietly tells them, the jar is not finished yet, even now, especially now. You will not need dramatics to say it. You will only need what you are learning in this dry stretch, that the shortage was never the end of the account, only the middle of it. What was poured into you first will be poured out through you eventually, and neither the pouring in nor the pouring out was ever measured by how thin the cup looked in the meantime. Notice your shoulders one more time before we finish. If they have crept up toward your ears while you have been listening, let them fall, and let your hands open in your lap, the way a servant's hands open once the jar has finally been set down. Nothing more is required of you in this moment than that. So hear the last thing plainly, because I want it to be the part you carry out of this, and not the shame you walked in with. You are not the host who ran out and will be exposed. You are not the guest who only gets what is left after everyone better positioned has already had their share. You are the servant who kept filling water into a jar that made no sense to fill, and I am the one who has never once let that kind of obedience go unanswered. What tastes thin in your life right now is not the last thing I intend to pour. The best is not behind you. I have been saving it on purpose for exactly this part of your story. Rest in that. Amen.